Hi, I'm Matt Nicholson. I'm the regional landscape ecologist for the Pacific West region of the Park Service. My job is to help parks think beyond their boundaries, and that's exactly what we're going to be talking about today. Um, During this session, we're going to mix things up and slow things down a bit. In part because of an unfortunate circumstance, one of our panelists cannot make it today. But we are joined by both Doctors Tom Rodhouse and Dr. Beth Fallon of the Park Service, and looking forward to a great discussion. Uh, and we'll be discussing landscape level conservation. To continue with the theme of the workshop, wildlife do not know boundaries. Similarly, processes in nature do not know boundaries. Wildlife move, water flows, fires burn, diseases spread, ecosystem services benefits flow. More and more conservation of resources requires a broader perspective and a landscape. And today we're joined by two experts who consider the landscape level issues associated with the challenges they face and regularly meet them at a landscape level. So to start off our discussion today, we'll have Dr. Tom Rodhouse, who will be speaking to us about the Northwest Bat Hub and bat conservation in the Northwest and beyond. Tom is a vital signs monitoring ecologist with the National Park Service, currently on detail with the Biological Resources Division of NPS. He has pursued collaborative conservation across large landscapes throughout his career, most notably through the Picas in Peril Program, North American Bat Monitoring Program, and NP SAGE initiative. Tom holds degrees in anthropology, wildlife biology, and geography from Lewis and Clark College and Oregon State University, and a PhD in natural resources from the University of Idaho. Tom lives in Bend, Oregon, with his family, which includes a brace of corgis and a garden gnome. Tom?
Thanks, Matt, and thanks everybody. This is I'm really happy to have the opportunity to participate in the session and share a bit about what we've done on the bat scene in the Northwest. I'm going to try to share my screen here and make sure things are going. Matt, can you see a slide here? We're rolling.
Yes, I can. Thank you.
Okay, cool. Well, great. Thank you. So, yeah, real pleasure. And hello out there in virtual land. Looks like there's a good attendance, 60-ish or so, last I checked there. I'm in snowy Bend, Oregon right now, and it's kind of fun, cold. So what I'm going to do is just kind of introduce the Northwestern Bat Hub and the North American Bat Monitoring Program as a collaborative model for doing good work at landscape scales, in this case on bats. Of transferable ideas and approaches. And if I don't quite nail what we, knowing that there's time to kick around ideas and unpack stuff, I'm going to move a little bit fast and just kind of put some content out there, kind of let it simmer, and then we'll get with Beth's presentation, and then we'll all reconvene as a group. So I always like to start with beautiful bat photos. I mean, giving a bat presentation is easy money, right? So, but also notably, sometimes people are afraid of bats, right? So I suggest that if you are afraid of live bats, just wait until you've encountered a lot of dead bats. And of course, that is the impetus for the creation of the Northwestern Bat Hub, and NA Bat is the wildlife disease known as white nose syndrome, which emerged on the scene in 2007 and really took all of us in the profession off guard. It was quite an through to see all these experts, wildlife disease experts, really be flummoxed during kind of conferences and presentations, and it was disconcerting to say the least. But anyway, time has moved on, and so one of the things that we did in response to the white nose syndrome crisis is kind of seize the day, sort of. The idea that crisis begets opportunity, I think, is exemplified by what came about. And so really the story is about how bats have inspired radical conservation collaboration. And there are just so many superheroes that have really leaned in and pulled things together kind of on short notice and with way insufficient information, et cetera, et cetera. So too many folks to mention, really, but certainly in our region, Denise Louie scrambled a small team with Tara Chestnut, myself, Alice Chung Makubre, and a few other folks early on during the kind of what should we do, how do we begin to cope with this crisis kind of moment back in around 2010 or so. And we were able to sort of meet the moment and participate in the development of something quite extraordinary, which was this range-wide, this continent-wide program. Just again, because it's easy money, I like to throw out good photos. This is another one by my good friend Michael Durham. Some of you may have seen his work. He's worked with the Park Service on and off over the years. And this is a spotted bat, which is a pretty extraordinary animal, and especially the way Michael captured it in flight like that. It shows you how delicate these animals are, and just how wild they are in terms of form and function. It's spectacular, and I like us to have an opportunity to feel awe and reverence in this moment for the natural world around us and for the work that we're doing in service of conservation. So we developed a plan. I served as an NPS rep on a team that built the North American Bat Monitoring Plan in 2015. And then with the regional staff colleagues, like I mentioned, Denise and crew, we began to think about how we were going to address this. And we were hearing from parks, regardless of whether they were dealing with networks where bats was a vital sign or not, the call to action was, look, we want to know more. We need help. We need to understand what's going on about bats. This is an emerging crisis. Whether you were into bats before the crisis, before the disease, if you were in the park, many parks, because bats are so widespread, suddenly many people were clamoring to get technical support and assistance. One of the things that we did as a regional team here is identify that the development of acoustic survey technology was opening up opportunities to survey for bats widely in many places. We didn't necessarily have to rely on expensive and challenging, capture and handling techniques. But we realized at the time that we needed a way to process large amounts of acoustic data. And so that really was one of the very first impetuses, if that's the right word, impeti, for trying to get something going. And with Denise's leadership, we really made some nice proposals to what was then a brand new fund source through SCC. It wasn't even baked into SCC at that time, the white nose disease fund source. And we used that to kind of start to build what then became the Northwestern Bat Hub as a way to implement this plan or participate in the implementation of the plan. There's a lot to be said about all of this. We wrote a paper in 2021 that's a good read about kind of the scalability and the deliberate ways in which we've tried to address landscape scale conservation. And I think there are a lot of good lessons learned for any broad regional inventory monitoring program like this. And of course, then the hub structure, the idea that we could implement at sort of a mesoscale between, kind of provide some connective tissue between the sort of overarching top level or coordination and administration of the plan, which in this case was headquartered in the USGS and Fort Collins Science Center, and then have that connection down to the ground to practitioners and facilitate information flow and other things. So that was the idea. I'm proud to say that our idea was kind of new and interesting, that Northwestern Bat Hub, in fact, was the first of the hubs that now exist across the United States and Canada. And we really were excited, remain excited about the way it catalyzes interagency collaboration, as you see here on our website. So, what does the hub do, and kind of how does this work? So we survey for bats broadly across, in our case, 3 states, Oregon, Washington, and Idaho. We We designed it that way around approximately the North Coast Cascades network, Upper Columbia Basin network, and Klamath network boundaries. So there's multi-network collaboration as far as the Park Service is concerned. But of course, this is highly interagency. And in a way, what's notable is the Park Service has a rather small footprint in the region, of course, but yet we've been able to have really positive, powerful, maybe outsized impact in helping move this along. So I think I want to make a pitch, even for those of you who aren't NPS in the call. Park Service, we're proud of what we do, and we know that we can catalyze. We have a unique in our neighborhoods, even if we don't own all the land, et cetera, even if we're a small player within a neighborhood, Park Service can really help move things along in terms of collaboration, which is fun to see and participate in. But to be sure, Forest Service, BLM, other state agencies and stuff like that have really stepped up. So we began to co-fund and really move this together. Here's another slide that just kind of gives you a sense of how we do our work. We're moving primarily stationary acoustic detectors around using a finite grid-based sample frame with a spatially balanced random sample that's sort of the backbone of what we do where and when and why. There are other methods and other techniques being used to examine a variety of different questions, which I'll elaborate on in a minute. We roll up our data to this headquarters for Collins Science Center. The NABAP program is there for contributing of things, including status and trend reports and stuff like that. This is kind of gives you a sense of what that might look like. Here's an analysis that I did a couple years back, examining one of the species of real concern here in the Northwest, little brown bat or Myotis lucificus, using data that from our 3-state region rather than pooling it across a broader region, and then hindcasting by way of a sort of a prior specification using a Bayesian analytical technique, pulling in legacy information that was compatible, going all the way back to a prototype effort that the Forest Service spearheaded all the way back to 2003, as a matter of fact. So this is a pretty rich, data-rich program. More recently, we've been looking at more recent data, and we have an analyst at Oregon State University who's working on his PhD, starting to get in under the hood with us. And so these are some new kind of unpublished drafty results. The 4-letter codes on the x-axis there are species. And we've just begun to play around with kind of thresholds of decision making. When would you send out the sirens and say, hey, there's a problem? Like, for example, the red MYTH, which is the fringed Myotis or Myotis thysinodes, which has long been a species of concern here in the Northwest. We can then translate this into kind of a report card approach, provide summaries and intuitive ways of delivering this information. So we're working on this now and hoping to get this all bundled up and published and available to everybody in the sometime this summer. There are a few emergent concerns that we see from the program regarding long-term trends in species. We provide other products, and so I think part of the story is just there are so many other benefits that come when we pool funds and work together, and sometimes it takes a while for the dream, like, haha, the smoking gun, amazing 20-year trend analysis takes a while. Well, what are the intermediate values and products that can come back to stakeholders? And so, for example, just being able to share code is meaningful, et cetera. And then we've done some other really interesting things as a group, working with Forest Service in this case, to look at how our regional models can be applied to guide forest structure, silvicultural management. And this is a little case study from the Deschutes National Forest. Oregon here, actually surrounding where I am. And so we've brought a bunch of information together, worked with some of the wildlife staff at the office here, and examined basically scenario planning using kind of a Bayesian decision analysis type of an approach, looking at how changes in fuel treatments in particular may impact the probabilities of really maintaining these snag dependent. We have a number of snag dependent species in this region, and so what's the likelihood? What are the risks to keeping those on the landscape? So really kind of using this occupancy modeling approach and knitting it together into decision support with tangible management actions and decisions around fuels and treatments. An early example that really kind of helped us convey the importance of using a big grid-based architecture that really helps knit a lot of folks together and chessboard upon which everybody can kind of find their way together and collaborate was this one at Crater Lake. And in here, it was a small project, but what we did is we nested it within the broader regional framework. And that was very, very powerful. And it showed how we can kind of use an architecture like a grid and essentially hang a variety of methods, a variety of different questions, and teams and research groups all together. So it really just kind of, I think, exemplifies how collaboration can be catalyzed when you use and build kind of a common chessboard, a set of maps that we can all identify with. Also, I want to highlight Dr. Rebecca McCaffrey's work up in the Olympic Peninsula and Northwestern Washington. Similar to her work, when with Tara Chestnut, they really nested their work in pursuing specific questions within this broader, contextualized by this broader regional and ultimately continent-wide program, which I think really adds a lot of power to the local scale work. Just some outreach products too, just some other things that you can know about. One of the things I think is really important, especially from a Park Service vital signs perspective, is to build protocols, protocol implementation plans, because this then paves the way for us to collaborate and to pool funds, et cetera. So it's notable that the North Coast Cascades Network, Upper Columbia Basin Network, and Klamath Network all contribute to a protocol and then a protocol implementation plan that really is how we as an NPS engage with the Northwestern Bat Hub and NA-BAT in this region. So I think these kinds of documents, sometimes they're a little bit painful. It took us a little while to develop them, but I think they're very, very important in establishing that. And then just to kind of put it out there, the story is out and about. We've done some podcasts over the years. We've got a small that we house here at Oregon State University that have been on TV, and it's really fun to see. We started this Audible Bat project as a citizen science, community science kind of program, harnessing the opportunity that we have around two species of desert-dwelling bats, the spotted bat and the pallid bat, both of which are species of concern. And as it turns out, they make calls that are audible to many humans with undamaged hearing. So we can use community scientists. We've got folks coming from all over the place around Central Oregon, Spanish speakers, all kinds of folks. You can see a little bit of we have a Spanish translation on our website, and we've done a lot of outreach to get folks to contribute and collaborate and bring data in this regard. And we've even demonstrated how valuable that is. We wrote a paper about this in Conservation Science and Practice a couple years ago, showing the benefits of how audible bats can provide this opportunity for building citizen science programs for bats.
Well,
and I think that's it. Yeah.
Okay, great. Perfect timing. Thank you so very much.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I read your mind, Matt. I said the shepherd's crook is coming out.
Okay.
Thanks, everybody.
Great presentation. Okay. Next up, we have a presentation by Dr. Beth Fallon, who will be talking about whitebark pine restoration and management broadly across the landscape, and in particular here in the North Coast Cascades Network. Beth is a vegetation ecologist for North Cascades National Park. She received a bachelor's from University of Wisconsin-Madison and PhD from University of Minnesota, Twin Cities. Beth started her career with NPS as a Student Conservation Association intern almost 20 years ago at Oregon Pipe Cactus National Monument. She just started at North Cascades in the last month after 5 years at Mount Rainier National Park as the plant ecologist. She's very excited to continue to work in the Cascades and continue to learn about the landscapes. Beth.
Thanks, Matt. Can you see my screen?
Yes, I can.
All right, perfect. And it's the actual slideshow and not like all my notes. Okay.
Yes.
Perfect. All All right, thank you so much, Matt. And I'm excited to talk to you all today about whitebark pine management in North Coast and Cascades now, and especially try to talk about how we're thinking about conserving whitebark pine across landscapes within the network in the face of a lot of change, and especially within the context of a significant body of work across the species range and within the parks. And yesterday, Eve Bernhard gave a great talk in the Burning Questions session that you can check out, and she can provide some more wonderful information as well. So whitebark pine is a long-lived, slow-growing, high-elevation tree. It's culturally important, and I think it's gorgeous. It's a tough tree. It's living at the edge of habitable space for many tree species here. And not only that, but it's an important forage source for many species. The Clark's nutcracker, pictured here, is a critical seed disperser for the whitebark pine, and it provides a connectivity between these like high elevation spaces and carrying seeds up to 12 kilometers and caching them, and then hopefully forgetting to eat them where whitebark pine can grow. So whitebark pine is incredibly tough, but unfortunately, it's experienced significant mortality across its range over the last 100 years or so. And it was listed as threatened by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service under the Endangered Species Act in 2022. And the primary threat to it is this introduced white pine blister rust. Any explorers of high elevation area might recognize some of these signs. It's a fungus. The spores infect the leaves and eventually can girdle the trees. And you can see this kind of these spore-bearing bodies that are yellow on the whitebark pine here. And whitebark pine is not only facing that blister rust that's been around for at least 90 years in Mont Rainier and in area parks, but they're also impacted by native pine beetles, mountain pine beetles here, which can be exacerbated by climate change and then experiencing, like all trees everywhere, the high heat and drought that's affecting species mortality. And so here, this map is this range-wide map of whitebark pine going from from the US up into Canada. It has the outline here shows the old whitebark pine range pre all this mortality, and then the new range emboldened in dark gray. And when we look at the parks of the North Coast and Cascades network where whitebark pine lives, so here, Olympic National Park, North Cascades National Park, and Mount Rainier National Park, we capture pretty small but important parts of the range. So how do we think about protecting a species that we only hold a little bit of? And then I think especially there's a history of inventory and monitoring here, but in terms of any active conservation or management or restoration, we are maybe still a little bit of babies. And I certainly feel that way. I started at Mont Rainier just over 5 years ago. So trying to think about how to manage and do a really good job of working with a very long-lived, very slow-growing species can be quite intimidating. But luckily, there have been people thinking about and studying and researching and working on whitebark pine for decades. So there's this range-wide work from researchers, agencies, NGOs, tribes, and then there's a depth of inventory and monitoring here. So I want to start with what's been happening locally and expand that out to how we can use the context of all that work to make best decisions going forward. So there's historic baselines. There was a 1936 map for Mont Rainier that actually served as a foundation for understanding where whitebark pine were in the park here until quite recently. And in that map, they were not afraid of bold colors. I love this map. They had Western white pine, which is another 5-needle pine affected by the rust, in this really bright pink. And they already noted that that species was experiencing declines because of white pine blister rust. And then a sort of softer pink highlighting areas dominated by whitebark pine. And we are not only working off 1936 maps anymore or 1980 ish maps from North Cascades. There's new vegetation maps from the North Coast and Cascades network and from 2021 for all three of these parks. So we do have some updated information about vegetation classes in these parks. And so in 1994, Dr. Regina Rochefort, who was at Mount Rainier and the North Cascades, led an inventory of those well-known stands mapped in the 80s and in the 30s in North Cascades and Mount Rainier National Parks only. And they found that there was blister rust at that point in every stand that was surveyed. So not all the trees, but every stand that was present. And overall, there was higher mortality at Mount Rainier than at North Cascades. And the Forest Service led inventory of Olympic National Forest and Olympic National Park stands in 2004. And then in 2004 to 2016, North Coast and Cascades Network and Dr. Regina Rochefort again led this stand level monitoring. So kind of long-term revisits looking at mortality, blister rust infection rates, demography in the stands. And from that work, we again see that there are these park level differences. Mortality was the greatest at Mount Rainier. Rust infection was higher at North Cascades, and it was the lowest from that 2004 transect work. So we already know that each of the parks are experiencing some different stresses. And North Coast and Cascades Inventory Monitoring Network updated their monitoring in 2014 to use more of a randomized approach and a fixed plot diameter to continue to evaluate whitebark pine dynamics across the whole park. It took quite a while to find plots that could qualify in Mount Rainier, and Olympic still is not included because it was really difficult to find the density of whitebark pine trees required, which was just 10 living whitebark pine trees within a 35-meter radius. But what we know from that is overall rust infection rates are up a lot from the previous work. There are park level differences, and now we're seeing infection at Mount Rainier. We still need to evaluate this work, and that's part of our goals for the next couple of years. And mortality wasn't different between Mount Rainier and North Cascades. So we weren't seeing park level differences in that, but we were seeing this big uptick in rust infection and a greater incidence at Mount Rainier. And we're still lacking that information about Olympic, so we'll come back to that. So we know we have some work that we can rely on here, and work that was done as inventory monitoring work without a specific outlet for conservation actions or management actions, but which we can use to inform that work. But we also get to operate within a much bigger group of experts who've been doing this work for a very long time. So we're not sitting here alone on a cliff. We get to rely on folks like the Forest Service. So I will say I've put little logos in here to help identify all these different groups. They are not necessarily endorsing my talk here. But so the Forest Service, we rely heavily on the forest health protection specialists. So these are forest pathologists and entomologists for a lot of aspects of forest management and monitoring in our parks, but especially for assistance in training crews to identify white pine blister rust, which can be tricky when it's not in that kind of garish orange spore bearing stage, mountain pine beetle instance, and also to think about like best ways to manage and conserve these trees. And so here are forest health protection pathologists and entomologists training crews this last year out at sunrise at Mount Rainier. And the Forest Service has a deep history of work trying to find trees that are resistant to rust. So if anybody attended Eve's talk yesterday, you'll recognize this figure from Sinesco et al., where they've grown out seedlings from trees collected across the range. Here they're focused on Washington and Oregon, infected those seedlings with rust and looked at the signs for genetic resistance. And what we know is, at least in the kind of Mount Rainier and these seed zones outlined here, there's a lot of resistance at Mount Rainier, less so at North Cascades, but we do know of elite trees there, and Olympic is still quite an unknown. So when we're thinking about managing for a landscape, it might be that places like Mount Rainier or sections of North Cascades that host areas with high resistance trees have maybe outsize to make sure they conserve those trees and protect those populations for species conservation. Another really critical group that Brent Johnson mentioned at the opening of this series on Tuesday is the MPS 5 needle pine group. And this is a community of practice that is pretty important for Park Service folks working on 5 needle pines, which includes whitebark pine. And it provides a group of experts. It provides, kind of a continuation of institutional knowledge. So folks like me who have only been in the world of whitebark pine for 5 years can rely on other networks who have been doing really incredible monitoring work, who have been implementing different restoration tests, and use that to improve what we're doing, and also to understand where our parks differ. So we know our parks here in the North Coast and Cascades Network do not have the same level of mountain pine beetle infection and infestation and loss that other parks do. So we might be able to learn from those different areas. And also there is an effort by the Whitebark Pine Ecosystem Foundation, American Forests, and the Forest Service to pull together a national whitebark pine restoration plan. And there have been various data calls for this work, with guidance on picking areas that are of high focus for conservation, for prioritization, and for restoration actions. And I will say that these data calls came out a few years ago, and they were an incredible opportunity to pull together all the work that had happened in our network to think about it in the context of this restoration plan. And so here at the parks, we had staff that were currently on, staff that had been retired or moved on, and people who have moved on since, who were able to contribute information that they knew and find all the data that we had to help us understand what do we currently know about whitebark in these parks, because that's where we need to be able to identify gaps and to move forward with planning.
Beth, just so we have some time for some discussion, okay? Thanks.
Oh yeah, I'll just wrap it up here. So the timing of that planning was really great, because that came right before there were calls for bipartisan infrastructure law and Inflation Reduction Act funding. So we were able to put in efforts to update inventories in the park and start to pull in more information about Olympic, identify areas to collect seeds. We're working on projects to improve mapping. And we've also been able to hire a restoration ecologist, Steve Bernhardt, to think about how we pull together a restoration and conservation plan for the future. So that's it.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Tom, you can put your camera on and shut off your and unmute yourself. Thank you both very much for great presentations. I'll leave the applause to slow down a little bit. So if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the Q&A feature. I do have some questions that I've put to Beth and Tom in advance so that they would be prepared. So I'd like to just start off with a quick question to both of you. All of your efforts are very collaborative by nature. Could you talk to the benefits you get from collaboration at scale? Beth, you can start if you like.
Yeah, a huge benefit of collaboration is being able to build on expertise. I think it really helps us not recreate the wheel. And also I think it helps people move into the community of practice more readily. So like I said, I'm relatively new to the world, but there's so many people out there doing incredible work and really willing to share that. And I think that expands our capability to do work.
And yeah, I would add to that the collaboration, these landscape scale collaborations, when you can get multiple agencies, partners, groups involved and pool funds, it spreads the burden more broadly so that no one organization really has to carry the load. And when we're trying to do things at scale and over time, of course, it's expensive and taxing. So finding ways to do that creatively. In our case, we used the cooperative ecosystem studies units, and the BLM could do that. We could all pool our funds at a land grant institution like a university. So that's a nice strategy, I think, that works well.
Great, thanks. Okay, reversing it. Similarly, scaling up where it comes with significant challenges. Tell us about some of the challenges you face in doing your work at scale, not simply at one spot at one time.
There's de-
Tom, go ahead.
yeah, there's definitely one of the things that I've learned as an ecologist is that I wasn't trained humanologists. So when you're doing collaboration and you're building teams and trying to get people to arrive at consensus, that's a non-trivial process. So the human element of working together in service of non-human things is actually a pretty big deal and takes a lot of time and a lot of energy, a lot of tact and patience. So the process in our case of getting folks to really come around and agree on common methods, common protocol, and approaches, that takes time, and it's a beautiful process, and you learn by doing, and it wasn't something that I was trained to do per se when I was at university. So anyway, you kind of learn on the job on that one, but I think that's an interesting challenge.
Great, thanks. Beth?
I think we're still in the process of that. And certainly we have commonalities in, say, inventory or in our monitoring protocols with other networks. But in terms of scaling up, there's a complexity of even just not having the same information from the same area from different areas. So still in many ways a big unknown, whereas we've had a deeper history of work in the other two parks in our network. So I think that will be a big part of the task going forward, is figuring out what we decide is the appropriate action and how we lay that out in all three of our parks and make sure it fits well within all the other work happening in the wonderful world of Whitebark.
Thank you. I know you both touched on this, but if you could talk about the successes things you've learned or successes you've had because of the fact that it's not simply an observation at a site or work at a site. It's a broader landscape effort. If you could talk to that, that would be great. Beth?
Well, I think there's just recently in going through, these like larger scale calls, which I know are still like a bit uncertain now on how much funding we'll get out of them, but it was a really nice opportunity to take, our little project of our three parks, which aren't so little, but still are small in the range, and get that incorporated into larger projects that were multi-park, multi-network, multi-region, and be included in a really compelling effort for species protection versus, how are we going to manage whitebark pine at North Cascades National Park? And it's a more compelling funding reason for sure.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you. Tom?
Yeah, and adding to that, I'm fascinated by the power that the park system, the many parks and networks offers for meta replication and for learning. I think it's really bowled me over many times over years. Just how cool it is to take a single question with a well-developed protocol and replicate that not only locally in a park but across many parks or across multiple jurisdictions, because that's when you really test what you think things that you thought you knew don't hold up when you go to a new place. The idiosyncrasies of place-based learning, I think, is really powerful, and it's another testament to what the national park system offers as parks as laboratories, parks as classrooms, and that kind of thing.
And all of the parks as a landscape, as you say.
Right.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. We're very close to the top of the hour. So if there are any questions, I guess we're at noon now. So I guess we'll end there unless people have any burning questions. Thank you so very much.